Welcome to Dead Headspace, part of Silver Shamrock's Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and Unburying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are talking to the lovely Cattherine McCarthy. Hello, Cattherine.
Hi, boss. Hi, everyone.
How's it going? So let's just dive right into it. What got you into horror?
Oh my goodness me, such a lot of things really. But I just think that basically, ever since I was a child, I've been pretty dark person. Um, just liked things that were dark, liked things that were quite spooky as a child, and early films such as The Birds and Hitchcock stuff, and those type of things. I just think I've just always been in touch with my dark side.
Oh man, The Birds. That's my favorite Hitchcock film.
Yeah.
For those that are interested for a little take from Joe Lansdale, episode 100, we talked about The Birds for a little bit, and as always, he's got a little interesting insight on that. Brennan, I'm gonna pass it to you, buddy, before I yammer away.
Sure. So, Cattherine, you mentioned that you've always been kind of drawn to the dark side of storytelling. I think I read somewhere that you grew up on oral storytelling. Was it from your mother? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. I'm very interested in that because that's an art form that I feel like is really starting to die away.
Right. Well, my mother just had the knack of being a really good storyteller, and she had a tough upbringing. My mother, she had a lot of love in the family, but she was one of 11 children, so as you can imagine, there were lots of stories always being told in the house. They didn't have a lot, but she would tell me sort of anecdotes from her own childhood, and they often had a dark edge. Really, there was always a bit of a bittersweet edge to them. Also, with things like fairy tales, I can remember that she always told me her own version. So, and her version always seemed to be that little bit scarier than the actual tale. So her version of The Wolf and the Seven Kids, for example, was quite scary, and even now after all these years I can still see her expression as she told it. So I think she passed that on to me really, and she had a love, even though she was from a poor background, a disadvantaged background. A lot of people were in those days, and she really, really loved reading and writing, and she taught me to read before I started school. So I was about 4 years old when I was able to basically read. And I remember the teacher having quite a surprise the first day I started school, so I think it just stemmed from there. And she was just a very good teller of anecdotes, basically.
I love the idea of telling stories in that manner and always adding your own spin to them. Folk tales and to a lesser degree, even folk songs, where the melody evolves over time and the words change depending on the personality of the person behind it. I think it's the precursor to, translating books to movies and things like that, and having different elements take center stage in different versions. I think it's so sad that it's almost kind of becoming a lost art. Now, is that something you picked up right away? You enjoyed hearing those stories, and then you took it over?
Yeah, definitely. And from a very young age myself, I wanted to be a primary school teacher. I think because of the way my mother was, she was just a natural teacher, even though she didn't have the qualifications. And so my interest was there from a young age. And I actually ended up teaching primary for 28 years. And a big part of teaching for me was the oral storytelling. And like you say, nursery rhymes. I've got an absolutely awful singing voice, but it doesn't really matter when you're with young kids. And, that was my favourite part of teaching, really. And in the latter, I would say 10 years, I taught English all morning to different classes, even though they were primary kids. So, I did an awful lot of storytelling, and it just evolved from there, really. It was the biggest part of the job that I enjoyed the most then.
Did you see a lot of reactions and the kids' expressions when you
Oh,
told those
definitely.
stories?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the kids, unfortunately, like over 28 years, I saw a big difference. It became that most children started school without any sort of bank of nursery rhymes. Most of them, you know this, Bren, probably yourself as well, like I think, even though I've talked about my mother sort of being poor materialistically, she was rich in a lot of ways because she had that bank of storytelling from her own family. And unfortunately, children these days might have the best clothes and the best mobile phones, but they don't have any wealth of language. And you'd be surprised, I mean, I don't know what it's like out there, but over here, particularly the area I taught in, which was in the Welsh South Wales valleys, which is a very deprived area of Britain, one of the most deprived areas of Britain, completely actually. They come to school, and most of them these days, well, I would say probably 50% of them are practically guttural. They can't speak, and they certainly don't have any sort of oral storytelling skills and any wealth of nursery rhymes or anything. So it's very important, with the younger ones particularly, that you start that off really early on.
I can't speak to that exactly, but I do believe that to a degree it is a universal experience. And
Yeah,
this could be a 2-hour conversation in and of itself.
just
But
yeah,
it even in just 12 years of teaching, I'm noticing a big difference in students that come in, they start kindergarten, and they are more prepared than I would have been, 30 odd years ago. They can read, they know their letters better than children used to going into kindergarten, but it's almost just like a set of facts and they don't know what to do
yeah,
with it. The
yeah.
the creativity, that, and I'm sounding like just an absolute old codger here, but
No,
the
no, same.
creativity that um, any one of the three of us would have made complete and utter use of in our childhood, it's I don't want to say it's gone, but it's certainly not the same.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I'll come in the morning and there's kind of a before school, I guess, care program. And all the students are, separated on devices. Some are like watching a movie, but they're not, playing together. They're not engaging in creative activities.
Yeah,
It makes me wonder if you gave these kids a box and a a tin of markers,
yeah,
what would they do?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think it's a great disadvantage, but like you say, it does make me sound really old, which I am, but I could moan about it forever. But, a lot of them back where I came from, then they will come in now and they're not even toilet trained, so those basic skills have gone to a great degree. Not all of them, obviously, you get some really the opposite end as well, but it tends to be two ends of the spectrum then. But as you say, their social skills playing together and just being sociable, pretty poor.
Yeah. That's a whole different breed of horror than the one we brought you on to talk about. But
Yeah.
so I'm curious, since we're on the subject of teaching anyway, you taught for 28 years, you said,
Yeah.
and now you write full time, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, when my mother died from a brain tumor at age of 71, it sort of really gave me a rethink, and I thought, life's so short, you just want to make the most of it. So my husband and I then, Tony, we put together a financial plan and really sort of went for it so that we could both finish work early. So we finished work when we were 52, both of us, and we were pretty, stable. I'm not wealthy, obviously, because we both had, that type of job. Tony worked in university and I taught all my life. But we both finished, and now we're able to do comfortably what we want to do all day, every day. So I would advise that for anybody.
That's the
That's
dream.
that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
So in your 28 years of teaching, what are some things that you learned that you feel like make you a stronger writer now?
Well, definitely teaching English helps you as a writer, I would say. Definitely just, all the basic, grammar and so on, and just everything that goes with it, really. But I mean, over 28 years, I saw an awful lot of change in ethos about, it went everything from just let children express themselves and just see what comes from nothing, basically, to a far more stricter way of teaching literacy. And, the grammar was coming back, and formal grammar and so on, and spelling became much more important than it was years ago, because what it is with government, they go through phases where things are fashionable and then they're out of fashion, and another government comes in and says they need to be taught formally, and then that goes out the window. So I saw a lot of changes, but definitely I would say teaching English certainly helps your own writing.
I'm curious about over there, because over here, when I was growing up until probably high school, cursive was a big deal. It was a fundamental thing to learn, and it isn't anymore.
Yeah.
Over here, I'm wondering if it's the same in your part of the world.
Yeah, that came and went, because we found that, because children tend to be on iPads and computers and things most of the time, their fine motor skills were becoming really, really poor. So they didn't have any pen control, pencil control, whereas when we were kids, we always had colouring books and pens and pencils, and it was just part of, everyday routine. But children don't have those basics. They literally they haven't got a pencil case, they don't own pens and pencils. So as you can imagine, then their handwriting skills were shocking, really bad, so we start off like at the age of 3. For some of them, it's the first time they've ever held a pencil, and handwriting definitely presentation wise deteriorated over the years. But again, as with other things, it cursive came in and out of fashion, and as I was leaving, it was sort of becoming more fashionable again, but it came and went.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that makes sense. I just want to touch on one more thing on this subject as far as storytelling goes. Now, for the two of you, because you're both teachers, do you guys think that the accessibility to really discover fairy tales, for example, just type in fairy tale, you get anything, could be from Asia or whatever. Do you guys think have you noticed it being beneficial with kids in your age groups that you teach, or are they really not paying attention to things of that nature?
Well, I personally think they absolutely love fairy tales when they're offered them, and I always made a point of teaching multicultural fairy tales as well. So yeah, huge advantage, I would say. And even things like nursery rhymes, it develops rhyme patterns and it helps with their speech. There's so much involved. But I think children love dark stories. I think we underestimate what they're capable of, not being afraid of, basically. They love a bit of horror, in my experience. What do you think, Brennan?
I think you're dead on where you said that they love fairy tales when they have the exposure. To Pat's specific question, how I forget exactly what it was, but with them being able to kind of find them at their fingertips, it's just a Google away. I don't think they'll go in that direction on their own, or at least not the levels that I teach. Yeah. But as far as, yes, they love fairy tales, I mean, I will gravitate a lot towards choosing songs that kind of have a almost fairy tale ballad style and tell a story throughout. Even though they're a little more difficult to learn because they include more lyrics, kids tend to enjoy them. There's one, I don't know if either one of you are familiar with it. We did at the end of the school year and the kids loved it, called The Ballad of Senor Don Gato. It is a Mexican folk song that has a cat who receives a love letter that his lady cat has agreed to marry him. He gets so excited that he falls off the roof and dies, and then comes back to life reanimated in order to marry this girl cat. And the kids love it. And how dark is that? It's got zombies. It's
yeah. I can imagine. Yeah, they do. They definitely love a bit of dark.
Yep.
Cattherine, what's that story? You said The Wolf and Seven Children?
The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids.
Oh yeah, I haven't heard of that one. What's that about?
Oh, it's a traditional fairy tale. It's sort of another version of, there's big bad wolves in so many fairy tales, aren't there? It's just basically about a mother wolf who has 7 kids, and she goes she goes out, into the woods to get food and so on. And there's a bad wolf as well prowling the woods, and she always tells her kids that when she comes home, she locks the door and she says, tell, if you want to find out if it's me or the bad wolf, you've got to tell them to put their paws up at the window. And she says, when I think of it now, right, as a kid, I didn't see this at all. But now as an adult, I can see there's a possible racial connotation there, because she says, because she's a white wolf, right? And she says, your mummy has got white paws, but the big bad wolf has got brown paws. So you tell them to put, his paws up at the window. Now, like I say, as a kid, that totally went over my head. And the story is then that the wolf dips his hands in flour to turn his paws white, and the kids let him in, basically. So he tricks them. But I mean, I don't know whether I'm just reading too much into that, but it is possibly, what I mean? I think sometimes things like that years ago had an underlying element that we see now that nobody ever saw back then, and perhaps it wasn't intentional. But I think you need to be more careful these days.
Yeah, it could be a million things. It could just be that was the color that popped in their head.
Yeah.
It could be that they were racially targeting a race. It's hard to tell, especially because they have a lot of people, because we, on our other show, on Burying the Dead, we're trying to focus on classic paperbacks and in the horror genre. And, I'll just say, we're talking about Rosemary's Baby, and in one of the first pages, R11 describes the elevator attendant as a Negro. Like, you can't say that shit nowadays.
Yeah.
So, I got to go on a limb and say he wasn't being offensive.
Yeah.
That's just how they talked back then. And I know that's going to piss some people off, but it's so many variables. But I totally see what you're saying. And that makes me think of Looney Tunes. Like, there's definitely the way that they draw Black people, especially, super racist, and Asians, actually. So, yeah, it's so many things you see as a kid, and then you see as an adult, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's true.
I mean, personally, I don't think we can change history. The important thing is that we learn from it, isn't it?
That's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to go on a super short tangent, but I just saw yesterday that for, God, I forget what state it was, but they are taking, somewhere in the South in America, they're taking they took the Andrew Jackson statue, removed it, and I'm all for that. Like, it doesn't make sense to hoist them, but my personal opinion is that they should be in museums, because you don't want to forget the past.
Yeah.
Because how are you gonna know to look out for the next bad guy in the future if you don't know what the past presented?
Yeah.
That's a great
point. And I find myself asking more and more these days, has our world changed for the better? And unfortunately, I can't see much of that happening. I don't know. I think we're in a bit of a dire straits at the moment everywhere. I think COVID hasn't helped, and, various things. I mean, for Britain as well, Brexit, to me, coming out of a union is not the best thing. I think we need to work together, but, that's a whole another subject that we could spend a day on as well. But, to me, things are not better.
Yeah, I think people are always going to be people. No matter what kind of shiny toys or technological advances you got, people are people.
Yeah.
Brennan, you want to steer us into, I might butcher the title, Immortelle? Did I say that right?
Yeah, Immortelle, yeah.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, I mean, we're skipping some steps to talk about your newest release, but I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, is this the first non-self-published book that you have put out?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So, what made you decide, I'd like to see this work published through more traditionally, if independent?
Yeah. Well, when I first started, it never entered my head. When I first started writing, it didn't enter my head about sort of subbing or anything. I had no idea how the world of writing worked at all. I just thought, created this book, and because my husband's an artist, you probably know that from things I put on Twitter and so on, we just created this package together. It was a middle grade novel, my first book, and we can put this on Amazon and it'll sell. And I just was so naive. And I mean, that was only a few years ago. And it's only in the last sort of 18 months that I started to realize, it isn't as simple as that. And I started having a few short stories accepted then into anthologies. And again, that was a complete learning curve because I had no idea that those things even existed. If you spoke to me 18 months ago, I had literally no idea about anthologies and indie publishers, nothing at all. So, through various connections on Twitter mainly and a few other places, people started saying to me, why don't you sub a story for this and so on. So it basically came out of appearing in anthologies, really. And then I saw Samantha was putting out a call, and I happened to have written Immortelle, at the time. And basically, I just thought, I'll give this a go, because you get more exposure, obviously, with a publisher. People have more faith in you, I find. I mean, there are some wonderful self-published works out there, and I am still an advocate of self-published works, but it is so wonderful to have an opportunity to have a bit of exposure through a publisher as well. So, it's just sort of stemmed from there, really. So
and that's
literally a learning curve in 18 months.
That's a beautiful one for that exposure, because they got attention right off the gate because Samantha was coming off of true crime, which everybody loved.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh yeah. And then right, the first two releases they put out, Crossroads by Laurel Hightower and The Worm and His Kings by Haley Piper, two of the strongest books that came out last year. Yeah. So, I mean, what a wonderful home for Immortelle to find. Yeah. Now, one thing I really liked is that you gave us a page right at the beginning, and I would almost call this book unapologetically Welsh. Or at least unapologetically, UK. There's not an attempt to Americanize it, despite the fact that a lot of the people who pick up this book are going to be on this side of the Atlantic. Yeah. Instead, I'm going to use these words. Here's what they mean. You may be unfamiliar with the concept of an immortelle. Here's what that is. Just one page of everything you need to know to appreciate the story. And, damned if you didn't set it up, perfectly in one page, give me everything I needed to know. So I'm kind of jumping around here now, but I wonder, could you give us a kind of an almost back cover synopsis for potential readers?
Okay, well, I would say basically it's a ghost story. It's fundamentally a ghost story. There's quite a lot of magical realism in the story. I would say if you're looking for out and out explicit gore, it's not for you, because my writing tends to be more subtle. I would say it's in the quiet horror genre for sure. And it's basically about the protagonist is a woman who has a young daughter, and she's also, the woman is also a ceramicist, and she creates personalized immortelles, which are, memento mori, basically, for the gravestones after a personal tragedy. And she starts being able to communicate with the spirit world, and that has a big emphasis on the story and the way it pans out. So without giving too many spoilers, I think it's just basically a quiet horror ghost story, I would say, with a lot of magical realism elements.
Yeah, and it certainly, it's quiet horror, and all right, if you consider this a spoiler, I'm pulling from the back cover, but if you can, we can always cut it if it's too spoilery. It definitely fits nicely into the term of grief horror.
Yeah, definitely.
And I wonder if that was something, if that's a subgenre that you intentionally write in, or something you find yourself gravitating towards and say, oh no, here I am again.
Yes, the latter. An awful lot of my stories involve grief horror, and it isn't something that I intentionally set out to do. For me, I do gravitate towards grief horror. You know, people say that horror is upsetting and so on. For me, it has the opposite effect. So I use grief horror as a tool for coming to terms with life's difficulties, basically, and one of which is grief. You know, it's the one thing we all dread, basically, isn't it? You know, and all of us have to experience. So yes, I do naturally gravitate that way. Sometimes I intend to write a light story, but there'll always be an element of grief. It sort of works its way in without me even realizing it.
And I mean, that's what horror is, whether it's the most like in your face extreme stuff or whether it's the quietest things. It's finding a way to cope, a way to try and understand how we would cope with the things that scare us most. Yeah. And if being alone in a deserted woods and being stumbled upon by a werewolf is your biggest fear, more power to you, write that book. But I think that a more realistic fear is that loss. You know, what would I do without this if something happened to this person? And, you know, as a parent, that's why this book struck me. That's why Crossroads struck me, is if you are making a list of your top fears and the loss of a child is not on it, then that's my list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think as well I tend to write lighter and darker shades depending on what's going on in my own life at the time. Like the first collection I put out was Door and Other Twisted Tales, and that was a collection of portal horror. And the title of story there, Door, was very dark, you know. But the main character in Door has just lost his mother with a brain tumor, which is exactly the experience I had. So for me, it was the sort of mental anguish of coming to terms with that through a character, and I often do that. And if I'm going through a very light phase of life, you know, then my stories tend to be a bit lighter, but it isn't a conscious thing. It just sort of happens. And sometimes something angsty will be in me for maybe 20, 30 years, and then it'll find its way onto the page. So,
Cattherine, I wanted to, in regards to this book, I wanted to read something that Sadie Hartman put up in response to it yesterday or the day before. She compared your writing in this book to the scrummy, which is a combination of scrumptious and yummy, clicking of typewriter keys, the delicate crinkling sound of a glassine envelope, and sharp scissors gliding through parchment. That's how she views your storytelling voice. Now, I have my own interpretation of what that means, but I'm curious how you take that.
Yeah, well, I read that this morning. That was the first thing I saw when I put the computer on this morning, and I was really, really thrilled. You know, I think she's right, actually, because I think my sort of horror, I would say the first two bits you talked about, you know, the crinkling and the I can't remember the exact words, but those are the sort of I think my writing has a poetic tone, and I think that's partly comes from being Welsh, because we are known for sort of song lyrics and singing voices, not personally, and very poetic. People like Dylan Thomas and so on. Our prose tends to be poetic. So there's a lot of that sort of flowery language in a way that just comes naturally into my storytelling. And then I sort of lull the reader into a false sense of security. And then the bit about the scissors, I'll go in for the jugular. And I hope it's unexpected, really. So there's a poisonous edge that will sort of trip you up. So that's how I sort of interpret it.
Ooh, I like the bit about the scissors. Yeah, I definitely agree with you with kind of the flowery, poetic nature. One thing that struck me was the idea of the typewriter keys, because I mean, there's a difference in sound between clacking away on a typewriter and clacking away on a computer keyboard. Yeah. And I interpreted that as kind of, there's almost a classic feel to your prose.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but like I say, I only saw it this morning. That is true. And a few people have said my writing reminds them of Shirley Jackson. So, that there is an old-fashioned element to my writing. And again, it's not a conscious thing, it just happens then. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
That Shirley Jackson comparison's got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm reading her at the moment, actually, her short stories.
Oh, is that you
The
said the short
Lottery.
stories, but that's not the letters, is it? The newer one?
I'm reading The Lottery and other short stories.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, at the
I
moment.
got you. Brennan, anything else on this book, sir?
Yeah, one more thing before we move away from it. Now, we described it as grief horror, and it's, certainly not a lighthearted, fun read, but
No.
it's also at 100 pages. I don't want, anybody listening to this and considering it thinking that it's a depressing slog, because that's not it either. So how would you, to somebody who maybe grief horror isn't typically their thing, what would you say? What's a good reason for them to check it out as well?
Oh, good grief. I think it's the sort of story that that's a tricky one, that sort of takes you away. I mean, yeah, grief is the underlying element and it's a story of revenge, but there's a lot of lightness there. It's not all dark. I would say there's probably 70% of light as well, like the way that I sort of use the chemicals in the pottery. And, there's a lot of hope in the story as well. There's a lot of the influence of birds and nature, an awful lot of, there's a bit, quite a bit sort of spirituality in there, not in the traditional religious sense, but through the power of nature and plants and so on. So I would say 70% lightness and then 30% dark.
Yeah, you do describe some pretty neat stuff, details of one of the vases. I said vase. I don't know why I said that way. About I specifically remember of a bird and its eyes and how it glinted and stuff, and I just thought that's really neat because I like the images in my head. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, it has some really neat things in it, and also of glossing. I've never even thought of that. Like I've never thought of that process.
yeah,
And from me, obviously, I don't speak for all Americans, but for me, reading books outside of what had been, no, that's not true. I was gonna say my comfort zone, but I've always been drawn to like British authors too. I guess reading outside of what I had normally read until I was introduced to the independent side of horror, dark fiction, and so forth. I think that you guys shouldn't, you guys meaning non-American, I know Wales is under Britain, right? But I mean, non-English,
yeah,
England, London. You guys shouldn't change because how else are we going to learn about it?
yeah,
So I think you did a great job. Alan Baxter did that too with his little glossary for, was it Australian terminology? Like, it's
yeah,
great. I think that's fantastic. It reminds me of like, kind of, I guess, like foreign films.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it is what it is, but here's how you can understand and follow along with some subtitles.
Yeah.
So I just
Some
want to
of
say bravo for that. Seriously.
Thank you. Some of the vocabulary, to get the direct speech spot on, I would have had to use some Welsh, just little terms that they always use, such as Bach, but everybody calls everybody in Wales, not just children, everyone's Bach. Like the local councillor would knock our door, and the first thing he says when I answer it is Shemai Bach. It's just they would not say hello, how are you? So I wanted it to feel authentic, you know. So certain terms I had to use in Welsh. And
That's
then there's
great.
some that are similar to the English word. For example, diafol, Diafol, is the Welsh spelling of devil. But I think if you say, because the F sounds like a V in Welsh, so devil, diafol, there isn't that much difference. So I
Hmm.
think, it's quite easy to pick up.
For sure. And I just want to touch on something that you guys were talking about a few minutes ago about horror. how and we've talked about this with other people, but it's I think it's important to reiterate every now and then, which is that, for example, my father-in-law, he's not like he'll ask me, we have a good relationship, we talk about what we're doing, and I know he knows I got a podcast. It ain't for him, but he kind of said that, oh, horror's not for me. I don't like that. I'm paraphrasing. Basically said he didn't like that blood and guts, and I'm like, interestingly enough. And then I start talking about basically what we talked about, because that's
Yeah.
kind of what people think. And
Yeah.
I mean, he works in a shelter in a rough city, and I'm like, you live with horror every day, man.
Yeah. And that is real horror, isn't it?
Yeah, he deals with drug addictions, mental health, just people that are broken in some cases, people that are desperate. So I'd like to move on to your photography. Just very first question is, what is it about photography that draws you to it?
Well, my husband's really the photographer. I just dabble. Most of the things I put up are his, but I do use sense of place as a stimulus for writing very, very often. So we're very lucky around here as well. There are a lot of historical places that we can visit, churches, castles, you name it, standing stones, like the story I wrote for Carrick Sanson. And so I find those places very good for stimulating story ideas. And I would say probably 70% or even more of my stories are set in the past. So, for example, I've got a story coming out in the next British Fantasy Horizons journal that's due out now, any moment now. That one's called Mosaic, and that stemmed from a photograph of a stained glass window that we took when we were out and about, and then my husband actually created the front cover image for this particular edition of British Fantasy Journal as well. So we both sort of featured in there. And you've probably seen on Twitter, I post lots of photos of standing stones and cromlechs and graveyards and so on. We'll just sit there and spend literally an afternoon in a graveyard. So I just find it, for me, I'm not a visual person. I'm definitely an auditory person, and I pick up on words far more than visuals. So to get the sort of visual imagery that I need to create stories, I need to be given a picture, and that's what photography does for me.
That's awesome. And just for those that don't know, standing stones, what are those?
Standing stones such as Stonehenge. So, they've got various names, menhirs and cromlechs, they're known as in Wales. They are ancient historical stones that have been placed, thousands and thousands of years ago, and we've got quite a few of those around here.
That's really neat. And that's awesome that you and your husband were in the same magazine. That's really neat.
Yeah.
My wife's not into cemeteries, but the one cemetery that she came before we moved from New England back to her home state in New Jersey was where Lovecraft was buried in East Providence, called Swan Cemetery.
Right.
And it's gorgeous. I felt like I come from a middle class family, and I'm like, I don't think I could afford dying here. But it's really nice, and for those that enjoy Lovecraft, there's just like all this not merchandise. There's all these little things to say, like I appreciate you there. So that's kind of cool. Brennan, why don't you take us away, sir? Sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
No, I was just going to say my grandfather was the sexton of the local church, so he was the gravedigger. So I spent a lot of my childhood in the graveyard. We'd walk up and see my grandfather, and then his son took the job over from him, and then his son took the job over from him. So, churchyards are 10 a penny to me, and they're all pretty ancient around here as well. Like I can just literally walk out my door, and maybe 300 or 400 yards down the road, there's a cemetery with Immortelles, Victorian Immortelles, still in place.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
How do you know how old that cemetery is? Because here the oldest, is the oldest like colonized. I don't even know if that's the right terminology. The oldest colonial or whatever cemeteries. I
Yeah.
could imagine they don't even come close to the ones that you
Oh,
guys
no.
have.
I mean, the churches, my local church, Bidwellty Church, where I'm talking about with my grandfather, dates from the 13th century.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had Lex H. Jones on for episode 1, and we talked. I don't know how long, but it felt like it was pretty lengthy about the difference between history of America and history of the UK, Europe in general, and how there's just a whole nother world of ancient. Um, I don't even know what the right terminology is.
Yeah.
It is just a whole branch of history to play with that, with all the architecture from that period, and
Yeah.
it's really neat. I've never been to Europe, but I would love to just do that too. Just walk around and not have my phone, just have a camera.
Yeah.
Sounds awesome. You
And
guys do that a lot, don't
expensive.
you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. All the time, like practically every week, especially through the summer.
That's
Um,
awesome.
like Carrick Sampson, I discovered yesterday just by chance that my story that was in Diabolica Britannica, Carrick Sampson, I based it on a cromlech, so a standing stone that is on the coast not far from where I live, and told the story from the point of view of the standing stone. Ramsey Campbell gave me a fantastic sort of foreword on that as well.
That's
And I
great.
discovered yesterday that it's been nominated in the ladies' horror shortlist. So that was lovely. Yeah, so that was a bit of a unique voice told from the point of view of the standing stone. Thousands and thousands of years old, an ancient monument.
I'm sure they got stories to tell. Brennan, pick up, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna say congratulations on that shortlisting. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it
Um,
was a total surprise.
hey, that's the best kind of surprise to find, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your beginning of writing. Now, obviously, you started writing when you were still teaching, just in your spare time.
Yeah.
What kind of kicked that into gear?
Well, I think I would consider myself always to have written really, but it was something I loved doing from childhood, and I always seemed to excel at reading and writing in school. So the love has always been there. But yeah, I self-published my first book, a middle grade novel, because that was the age of children I was teaching at the time in 2015. So that was really when I started taking it more seriously. And then after that, when my mother died, I wrote Hope Cottage, which isn't horror at all, though it is a dark sort of family saga that explores grief. And grief is definitely the sort of theme of that book. I donated everything I made off that one to the Brain Tumor Society. And then I started writing my short stories, so Daw and Other Twisted Tales, the collection built up. All portal stories, like I said, and they are set all over the world. A few of those have been published. One of them that I set in Australia is published in 25 Gates of Hell. Yeah, and then from there I started writing more and more shorts until I mean 50% of the stories that are published in Myths and Megaliths have been published in other anthologies or online, and then 50% of them are new. So because I thought, like, if people have bought those anthologies, it isn't fair for them just to have a complete lot of repeated material. So I did a 50-50 spread. And then I have a novel that I've got out on sub at the moment, called The Wolf and the Favour. That's sort of, I would say it's more young adult, though I think a lot of adults would enjoy it. And the protagonist in that is a 10-year-old girl who has Down syndrome. So I know, like, for example, thinking about that one now, going back to you saying earlier about the teaching experience and how that affects my writing. My main character in that story, Hannah, with Down syndrome, because I did teach some children with learning difficulties, including Downs as well. So I'm still using those skills, to get her voice right. So you just don't think about it really. So that one's ready. I might end up self-publishing it because I'm not very good at the subbing game. I'm all right with, anthologies, but I sort of give up. I can't troll huge lists of agents, and I just can't do it. I go, I'll send a year and there, and never mind, I'll give up and self-publish it. I'm not very good at persisting with that, because I think it's just because, I don't know, I think I've reached a stage in my life where I'm not looking for fame and fortune, and that's genuine. So, I just think it's just nice to write the stories and let people read them, basically. So I'm not particularly, it's not really a career for me. Does that make sense?
No, definitely
not
makes
only
sense.
that, but if you're self-publishing the right way, what you have to do is you have to shell out money for a cover. You've got that set. You've got that aspect taken care of. You have to get it edited, and you have to get it in front of eyes that you trust. And you've made so many good contacts in such a short period of time that 2 out of those 3 check marks are, pretty much are easy street for you. So why not?
And as you know, Tony makes book trailers for me as well, which are pretty pretty hot, because he's an animator. So I am really lucky. It just works as a package, really. I mean, it would be quite nice, I suppose, one day to have a traditionally published book, but for me, it's not the be all and end all. What writing gives me mentally, a mental focus, is far outweighs any sort of fame or anything that comes from it, And it's been really nice to meet people in the writing community, such as yourselves and so many other people, because my friends in real life are not interested in the least.
I think a lot of people can relate to that, because we're spread out throughout literally the world. I think that's really nice and important too, what you said, because everyone's got different, just like anything in life, everyone's got different goals. Everyone has different lines where they're like, this would make me happy if I accomplish this. And going back to something you talked about, because Brennan brought up or asked you about self-publishing your previous books. Paraphrase, of course, but Cattherine, you said something about how there's some really good self-published books. There are, and I think it's really important. I got dragged through the coals for saying it, I guess, the wrong way years ago, but it was because my stance, and I think there's something else important to reiterate. It's not for everyone, I get it, but I feel like if you want a good story that you want people to read, it has to be edited. And that's one of the steps in any type of publishing. And also, for some writers, it helps have beta, readers, but also having a good cover and so forth. Yeah. I mean, you, Gemma Moore, Alan Baxter, even, and there's a long list of people that do it right. So I think that's really good to just point out that's not a bad thing. To do, because when they first came out, it was like, don't self-publish. It's Go ahead, I cut you off, sorry.
I was just going to say, the only sad thing is we have to be honest, and there is an awful lot of bad stuff out there as well, and unfortunately, there is no sort of standardization with self-publishing. That's the only shame of it, really. Because I'm sure I'm not on my own here now. We've all picked up books and we think, shit, what's that? Within a few pages. I mean, come on, you've got to admit, right? Some of them are really, really bad.
They are.
They are really, really bad. And it's unfortunate, because I've got total mixed feelings about this. And this again comes back to teaching. And Brennan, I'm sure you will feel the same. I hate knocking people. So like, if a child brings you a piece of work, the first thing you'll do is look for the positive. And that child's handwriting might be atrocious. Their spelling might be so bad that you can hardly make out what they're trying to say, but that child might have fantastic ideas. So there's always something to praise. And I really, really hate knocking people when they're having a go and it's giving them some pleasure. But by the same token, people are spending money on this, and it isn't fair to produce a very bad quality product. So I'm totally torn with that sort of thing.
That's like the reviewing game, you know? It's
Yeah.
just like, I don't know about you two, but for me, I won't, if I feel a book is a 2 or 1 star, I won't post it. And
Yeah,
I just,
same.
I don't think that's helping anyone. First off, I don't hold my opinion as high as like God or whatever, where I'm like, oh, well, this will change your career. I'm not in that position. There are people in that position,
Yeah.
like Brian Keene. I mean, he said publicly that he doesn't kind of post stuff anymore because of the controversy it brings. But
Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you got to think, like, is it really important that I put out my opinion about why this sucks? Because that could really, I don't know, that could also kind of fuck someone up for a little bit.
I mean, we've seen it, haven't we? We've seen it on Twitter. It can devastate people, you know.
Yeah.
And if I read, I think you can tell within the first few pages. I tend to read the look inside on Amazon, and that'll give you so much idea of what's going on, you know. So that's always a big thing. But if I end up with a book that's really bad, or sometimes it's just not to my taste, because like we're all different when it comes to preferences, then I'll just DNF it, you know. Or if I've struggled through it and I think, Jesus, that was a 1 or a 2, I don't review it. I'm not knocking people who do, because everyone, you know, is entitled to do what they want to do. But for me, I don't post reviews that are 1 and 2 star. It's just my personal choice, like you. I just can't.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and no judgments from either way. That's where I think it gets really cringy, where someone's like, "This is how I'll do it," so you know,
Yeah.
I'm really gonna get angry if you don't do it this way.
I
We
know.
see it all the time. It's crazy.
I know.
I was just telling Brennan the other day that there was something posted about people talking about some cat person, or if you know about it, I don't want to hear about like the details, but I just saw on Twitter like 2 days ago some people talking about someone that wrote about some cat or something. I don't know what the hell it's about, but I'm like, I'm glad I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. There's probably not a week goes by on Twitter unless you think, geez, I'm glad I'm not part of that, and I stay away from those controversies. I've got my own opinions, we all have, but I'm not here to argue with people. I'm not here to upset people, you know. I'm not trying to paint a pretty picture of the world, because, you know, it's a mess. But, you know, I just don't want to knock people. That's not why I'm here.
Yeah. You know what I personally found the best way uh, to not get roped into that usually is by not scrolling, because I'll just like see a friend or whatever, something that I want to comment on. I do that, and I'm trying my best now. I just like reply and go, all right, bye.
Yeah. I know it is difficult if you see someone you know and you consider them a friend, even though you've never met them. I mean, some of people I genuinely consider good friends, I know on Twitter and Twitter alone. Right. You know, and if you see them get in a bit of a hard time, it is tempting to dive in. And I think of it as a sort of like, it's the grown-up world of the playground. So, you know, there is a lot of bullying that goes on, though. It does, you know. And then the significant sort of stand backers, of which I am one, because I choose not to jump in and give my 2 pence, then they actually can make the situation worse sometimes, because the natural instinct is to defend someone you see under attack, particularly when you like that person, you know. But so I suppose we are onlookers in a way, and it is a shame, but it often ends up as a playground for me. And I think life's too short, you know. Just don't do it.
I'm sure Brennan's gonna jump in, so let me just make one more comment and then go for it, man. You know, I umpired baseball when I was 12 and in my hometown, and my dad said 50% of people will not agree with you. Every time 50 will. And obviously that figure is just like a generalization, but I was 12, and they were grown-ass men getting pissed about minor league baseball, which, I mean, unless there's money on the line, even if there is, that'd be weird. But the whole point is just like, if you don't take a stand, someone's going to get very angry if you do. So at the end of the day, take care of your own mental health. And
Yeah.
if someone's not going to act like a friend, I guess they're not your friend.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brennan.
I was going to say, I think we're all, guilty of considering people that, we've never met and live thousands of miles away from us friends just because we've interacted on Twitter and, read each other's books and whatnot.
Yeah.
And, when those pile-ons happen, as they frequently do,
Yeah.
I think the best thing to do is just send that person a message, be like, hey, thinking about you, support
That's exactly what I do. Yeah.
And because even if you jump in there and you stand stalwart against that army of hate, it's at that point it probably doesn't matter because that person has muted the conversation anyway and doesn't want to hear another damn thing about it. So.
I think if you could do that in real life, just like you hear someone that's like la la la, and you're like mute.
Yeah.
They made a movie about that. It's called Click, and it didn't go well.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, there's kind of that's funny as hell. Click was funny. Not a great movie in my opinion, but like it was funny. They made a one of my favorite shows, Black Mirror. I hope that comes back with season 6, I think 5. But there was an episode where it was in the testing stages where parents could give their kid this filter in. Basically a filter for life where you couldn't see violence, you could not hear curse words, and I'll spoil it if you guys want. At the end, the girl, I think kills her own mother. It's been a while since I watched it, but you can't see the actual violence or hear the actual cries because it's all filtered out. That show's great. If you guys haven't watched it, I'd watch it. There's so many crazy social commentary things in there that ring true.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen it.
There's also one about bees where they have they're like automatons. They're not real, but you need, like, without bees, this world won't work. And if there's people that make something good, there are people that gotta try to make it bad. So some hacker makes it so the bees attack everyone. So if you have thousands of bees attacking people, you're screwed. And on the note, while I'm on it, you know what? Screw it. I've looked up like future within our lifetime medical advances, technological advances, and one of them was 3D printers making human organs.
All right.
And the downside to that is hackers could potentially put viruses in an organ that would be in your body.
Yeah.
It's just all this crazy stuff.
Terrifying thought.
It is. Just imagine you get a heart. You're like, this is good, and it explodes or something.
Good story material, though.
That's true. Brendan, help me
There's
out.
There's always going to be bad people, and as depressing as it is, that means we'll always have things to write about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How fun. What would we talk about, man, if we write horror mainly? What would we write about if it was all good? Be fairy tales, right?
Yeah. they are the most dark, remember? Fairy tales. Lots of murder and blood and guts.
I mean, like Cinderella, the stepsisters chopped off their heels and toes to fit in the shoe.
Yeah.
I think Walt Disney was onto something. He's like, I'm going to secretly make horror very popular amongst the kids.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them start with the parents dead.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I saw Bambi as a kid. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about Welsh fairy tales and horror stories. I'm very interested if there's any that we haven't talked about yet or it could be, any UK based fairy tale or horror story that you don't hear in conversation amongst like Americans or non-UK citizens.
The main sort of fairy tale world in Welsh is the Mabinogion. Have you heard of the Mabinogion? No. So it was basically it's tricky to describe. It sort of links with historical facts, and you get things like King Arthur appearing in the Mabinogion and all these sort of characters. But it is really a collection of Welsh folk fairy. I think it's something like the 12th century, and they've been adapted and changed throughout time. That's the most famous version of Welsh fairy tales. You know, I mean, everybody in Wales will have heard of the Mabinogion, even if they can't name the stories. Like I said, they link to history. So I've got a story coming out with, Bridget's Gate with Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in his Weird Tales collection. And that one's called a Ceffyl Dŵr, which means the water horse, and that's based on a character from the Mabinogion. So it's a were creature that changes into a horse. So that's linked to the Mabinogion. Yeah, so and someone said on the review of Mr. Megalith that it's like a mini Mabinogion. So again, it's not a conscious thing, it's just I'm Welsh at the end of the day. I've spent all my life living in Wales, and that culture just comes through in my stories because we write what we are, really, don't we?
Now, speaking of coming back to your writing after we got off on a long tangent that somehow ended up in Twitter and Patrick recounting Black Mirror episodes. Now, when I think of you, and when I think of your writing, I think of primarily short stories, just because that's what I came across first.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference as far as, a length that you like to write?
Yeah, my heart is with the short stories, definitely. I mean, I've written, I think, 3 novels and 1 novella, and probably 40-50 short stories. And I really love short stories. They're definitely my sort of go-to, my natural, thing. And then I would say novellas. But I do like sometimes, like at the moment now, I feel like I've written so many shorts, some for, invitations, and others just to sub, and others just for the collection, to make up the collection with original stories. And I really want to get into a new longer piece at the moment, though I'm still sitting on The Wolf and Favour, which is, that's 80-odd thousand words, so that's a full-length novel. But yeah, shorts, it's my natural go-to.
Now, I wonder what it is about those. I've heard a fair few people say that, it's the most challenging way to write a story because you have to be so concise. Do you like the challenge, or is it just something that makes sense to you?
Yeah, it just makes sense to me, because I've heard the same thing, and people have said to me, oh, I admire you being able to write a short story, but I admire people who can write a series, because I could never, for the life of me, sustain that focus. I think my sort of, no, I really couldn't. I think my attention span, I think that's part of the reason why I like short stories, is because, you scratch the itch and it's over and done with.
Yeah.
So, definitely for me, short stories are easier. It's just something, that's just the way it is. I find it harder to sustain a full-length novel. And again, that might be partly because I'm not a planner. I'll wake up sometimes in the morning with a line in my head that has come from nowhere, and then I'll develop that into a short story. But it can't really work as a novel because it's just a line that's weird,
Yeah, I totally get that. Can you write a story if you don't have a title?
Oh yeah, my title, I find titles quite hard. They either come naturally, they just, emerge, or I really struggle to find a title. I'm struggling at the moment. I've written a short for the Sarah Tatlinger call, The Chromophobia. I mean, I don't know whether it'll get anywhere, obviously, but I've written one for her over the last couple of weeks, and I love the story. It's quite weird, one of my more weird stories, definitely, but I'm really struggling for a title. So yeah, the title comes last for me.
What's that for? I'm not familiar with that.
She's
anthology, I
in
assume?
an anthology called Chromophobia. She basically, though, she's not just looking for fear. Chromophobia is the fear of fears associated with colour, but
Oh, okay.
she's not just looking for that. She's looking for stuff like the Mask of the Red Death and the Yellow Wallpaper. So those sort of, I think she's looking for more sort of that gothic feel, which I love that period. Gothic fiction is one of my favourites. So she just wants you to do something original with colour. You know, she said she doesn't want to see all black and red, which is what you naturally gravitate towards as
Yeah.
a horror writer, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
That
Yeah.
wouldn't that, maybe it's just my brain, but wouldn't that make you want to kind of explore the color pink or?
I think that's what she wants to see, you know, is something, that's what she said in the call, if you look at the description, something different, you know. But mine's quite sort of multicoloured, to do with prisms.
Ooh, I like that. I love that idea. Um,
And I think
Reddit,
that anthology is coming out through Strange House, maybe, which
Yeah,
is
I think
like
so.
a division of Rooster Republic. They
Yeah.
did the Not All Monsters anthology
Right.
that came out last year.
Right, yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
worth a shot, you know, so
Oh,
I give it a
definitely.
go. And the way I look at it is, I'm honestly, genuinely one of these people that if I get a rejection, I just brush it off, because I just think, well, it's another story. Because for me, it's the process of sitting down and writing. And like I said to you earlier, the focus that gives you regarding mental energy is far surpasses having it accepted or not. I mean, it is nice to be accepted, don't get me wrong, but it really doesn't bother me. I just go, oh, well. I even forget sometimes, and then I'll see Tony like an hour later, and I go, oh, I forgot to tell you I had a rejection, because it just doesn't stick with me. And again, that's to do with my stage of life, I think, and what I want out of writing and what doesn't bother me.
for me, it used to bother me 8 years ago
Yeah,
immensely. I was like, but I only received rejections for like 6 years. It still upsets me, but it's at the point where it's like an hour, and then I'm like, I'm fine. How about
yeah,
you? How about you, Brian? What about you, man?
I perpetually have to remind myself that even the people whose names pop up in anthologies all the time, their ratio of rejections to acceptances is the rejection number is always, always, always going to be higher.
nice.
And I like to remind myself that I just haven't been at this for that long.
Yeah,
So, you know, it's for the most part, I think the answer to your question is I'm right there with you. I get it. I'm bummed for a little bit, and then I'm on to the next thing. Um, and that's something, Catherine, you said earlier that kind of stuck with me, where you were talking about subbing your novel a couple places and then saying, you know what, let's just I'm going to do it because then I can move on to the next thing.
yeah,
And that's what it is when you no judgment, although it's going to sound judgy, when you hear about authors that spend like 10 years perfecting a novel, it's like, oh, but don't you want to tell other stories too?
yeah, yeah,
I'm sure it's great. I'm sure you got every clause, every punctuation mark just right, but don't you want to do more? and
yeah,
and that's kind of where I'm at. When
yeah.
I get a rejection, if I can find another place to throw it, I'm going to do that. If not, I'm going to put it in a folder and eventually I'll put out a collection.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the same as me. Yeah, yeah,
Now, I'm curious because I don't know, and maybe I should, but going back to an older topic that kind of ties all this together is when I started writing, I didn't know where, like you. I mean, like, how do you know unless you know? Um, I didn't know where you even look for. I was thinking of agents in the future or getting a novel published, and which when you start looking, you eventually stumble upon an anthology. I don't even know what that word was when I first started,
yeah,
but there would be this book, something to do with markets, but the market of every anthology or what agents are looking for of this upcoming year. That's how when I started, that was kind of the big thing. But nowadays, it's crazy. There's so many websites that are constantly updating it. Um, if it wasn't for stuff like that, where would you see yourself as an author now compared to where you are now with the accessibility to how everything's interconnected in the world?
I'm not really sure I know what you're getting at there. Sorry.
I think I worded that all weird. So basically, do you think that yeah, Brennan just nodded his head. I could have worded that easier. My apologies.
I think what he means is, with where you are right now, where we're starting to see your name pop up in a lot of things. Do you feel like the accessibility of being able to find those calls on Twitter and websites like Horror Tree, do you think that's a big help as opposed to, the 1990s version of having to go out and buy a writer's guide the size of the phone book? Is that what you were asking?
Yep. He
Yeah.
knows me very well. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think I've, most of my stories have come about because of either Twitter or Horror Tree. And I'm at the stage now, luckily, because I'm getting quite a lot of them, like you said, starting to be seen, where probably 50% of my stories now are through invitations, which is nice. As long as I sort of, the theme has to warm to me though, or I have to warm to the theme, I should say, because I can't just write it if it's not my subgenre or my sort of, like, I can't do anything that involves space, because I'm absolutely useless with that type of thing, and there's certain things I wouldn't have a clue. And also, like, splatterpunk is, I'm not knocking it as a subgenre, it's just not something that I have any intention ever of writing. So yeah, Horror Tree is my go-to. A few other things that I see about on Twitter, but like I say, 50% of the time is invites now, which I'm fortunate, and sort of getting to know the right people. I've been lucky that I've met some people who, like Brandon from Crimson Creek. He was fab. He sort of pointed me in the right direction to start with. Jill Girardi from Candishire, she's been wonderful as well. That's great. So it's just building up contacts through social media. I don't think I control everywhere. It's just not me. I'm too lazy.
When you do eventually get to it, I really look forward to reading your quiet horror splatterpunk story.
It's not going to happen.
What would that even entail, man? So let's jump to, what are you reading right now? Catherine, what are you reading right now?
Shirley Jackson collection, The Lottery and Other Stories. Really interesting. I think she was quite sort of, again, talking about the race issues, she saw what was coming, I think. What's the word? When someone has that sort of insight, she's quite insightful, and she definitely knows people really well, and including children. So I'm really enjoying that. I'm just about to start Terry Tyler's new dystopian novel, Megacity. I've read the two that came before it. She's excellent, and she's been really supportive of me as well. She's a really good girl. We're quite on a par with our sort of likes and interests and black sense of humour.
Awesome.
I've just done a beta read for Tim McGregor. So, I'm not going to say anything about that because it's still to come. Yeah, that was excellent. I read it last week. I really, really enjoyed it.
It's not the one that he got. That one. I was gonna say, it's not the one that he got published with Silver Shamrock, is it?
So, I don't know.
Wasps and Ice Cream or something like that.
No,
I love that title.
It's just finished writing this. Yeah, I don't think he's done anything with this one yet. I don't think he's sent it anywhere. I'm assuming anyway.
Yeah, I will look forward to that. I loved Heart Strange and Dreadful.
Yeah, and he's fabulous. He's such a lovely guy. He's been so supportive of me.
He's a really nice guy. Yeah, and that was a great story. Brennan, what are you reading at the moment, sir?
I just started this book right here, Lambs Among Wolves by Russell James. If I'm honest, it jumped up my list a little bit because they promoted it as The Exorcist meets the Da Vinci Code. And I'm not going to pretend for a second that, Dan Brown's books are, they're not good books, but I don't love the term guilty pleasure, because if you enjoy reading something or watching something, then you enjoy it. Yeah. And I enjoy reading those books. They're fast and they're fun. and throw demons into this one, and it does have that kind of like Europe jumping, Catholicism based vibe, but with these exorcisms in the mix there. So I'm about 50, 60 pages in, and it's what it promises it would be. So I am enjoying it so far. Patrick, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm jumping around with like audiobooks, and I just started for the first time actually ever Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I like it. Her language, this is the only way I can word it. I'm a big fan of Lovecraft's like overall arcing ideas, but his vocabulary is harder to read than someone who wrote like 150 or so years before him. I like it. It's pretty neat. Epistolary, so far. I don't know if that's how the whole thing is, but I like it a lot. She's got a hell of a voice, and I know her past is pretty dark and intense, but I like that. I am reading. What was the next one? I gotta pull up my Goodreads because I'm gonna cheat for a moment. But
while you cheat, Pat, I wanna plug one more book, and I talked about it a few weeks ago, but I just finished it the other night. I want to plug Nightmare Yearnings by Eric Raglan. I waited through a story at a time over about a month, and it's really good. We talked about people who understand how that just short stories work for them, and Eric is just one of those people. He just knows how to tell a story in that condensed form. I don't think that comes out till September, but anybody listening, you should definitely check that out. It's
I've definitely seen that about, so it's quite early to get it noticed, isn't it, if it's not out until September?
Yeah.
I think I might already have it on my Goodreads list, actually, because I quite fancied it. Yeah, I'm sure I have.
And to plug his show real quick, Cursed Morsels is starring Eric Raglan. Really good stuff there. I'm also reading. This is epic fantasy. I don't know LGBTQ. It's LGBTQ focused, so I don't know what the exact subgenre would be, but it is by W. Dale Jordan. This is his second book in, I believe, a trilogy. It's called The Eagle in the Trembling Vessel. I really loved the first one. I thought it was insanely good. The interesting thing about that was he's the second gay author to tell me that they were told from other people that straight dudes wouldn't enjoy their work. It gets for W. Dale Jordan's book, it gets pretty detailed with male on male sex scenes. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, but I think it's fantastic writing, and the social commentary in it about what he has throughout the story is just great. It's an epic fantasy. It does new things to that genre that I haven't read before, so I would recommend that. I'm also reading Rosemary's Baby for Burying the Dead. That's pretty cool. It did a lot of things to the world after it came out, and it inspired The Exorcist amongst many other art. And I'm also, when I can get the chance, slowly going through Clive Barker's Books of Blood, volume 1 through 3. He's unbelievable. And you know what? This kind of ties into things that we talked about. Chad Lutzke posted this. Brennan, I'd like it if you could describe it. Talk about what Chad Lutzke posted with Clive Barker's earlier interview.
He shared an interview from sometime in the 1990s on this like daytime. It looked like a daytime talk show with cheesy, intro music done on synthesizer. And it was just very odd and off-putting. It was, essentially a format where the audience is allowed to ask him questions. And from the word go, they assaulted him. I think the very first question was something in the vein of, do you take responsibility for violence linked with, horror movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, which he didn't write or have anything to do with. And it's very indicative of that like satanic panic the media is ruining our children vibe of the 90s. It's very odd, but to his eternal credit, he has a little bit of what the hell's going on look in his eyes, but he stayed a lot cooler than I think I would have under that pressure, and he, answered everything very gracefully and very intelligently.
He's smart, so I'm glad he's coming back to writing too. It's been like a 6-year stint, but Cattherine, I don't think we ever asked. I apologize for this. When is Immortelle coming out?
Oh, this Thursday. This coming Thursday, the 15th of July.
Okay.
Look at that beautiful cover.
I'm getting more and more nervous by the day.
Aw. That's really neat because to plug Brennan real quick, it kind of goes along with what you just said about your own book. You both are acting the same way, and I feel like that'd be me too. You have worked on this; it's your baby, and now the date's coming up where the entire world will see it, and you can't stop it from happening.
I know, yeah, I know. I almost want to bury my head in the sand at this stage now. Seriously, I get really nervous about what people think.
We did this to ourselves. We put it out there.
I know. And every day I say, am I mental? Why on earth am I doing this? Publicly. Just write it and sort of just keep it on your computer. I really wonder why I punish myself like this sometimes.
And here's the funny part. You still want to go back for more.
I know. Total glutton for punishment. Because at the end of the day, we have to be honest, it does hurt when people say bad things. I mean, I'm totally all up for everybody, having different preferences, and I would never expect everybody to like what I do. But I've seen, not personally, I've been fortunate, but when you see people really ripped to shreds, I just think it's unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like something or it doesn't connect, that's fine. But yeah. I've learned as a reviewer, not because I'm friends or talk to people, but like Ron Kelly, he bust my balls. He did it on an episode, and Brennan did, where I rated one of his books a 3 out of 5, and I felt like a jerk. But he kept railing me, like, because he was doing it for fun. He's a Southern gentleman, but like he was just like kind of teasing me about it. But I was like, the way I tackled it is this is what I liked, and this is what I didn't particularly connect with. But there's still room for others to connect to that.
Yeah. I'm sure I saw that. It was one of your episodes, wasn't it? And I remember, or was it Gabino? I can't remember. I remember someone turning around to you and saying, and you gave me a 3 for that. And
that's Ron.
It was Ron, yeah.
It's so, oh man, like I've done that with a few people that I like, and I'm just like, oh God, I hope they don't hate me.
But a 3 is okay, isn't it? I mean, ratings mean different things to different people. And sometimes it's your own fault. Like I've picked up one recently and I started reading a few pages and I thought, why have I chosen this? Because the genre is not for me, and it isn't the writer's fault. It's totally my fault. Maybe I was misled a little bit by the blurb because it's far too sci-fi for my taste. But that is not the writer's fault, so it's totally my fault.
That's fair. I love where this conversation went because it presents a lot of different sides that maybe some people didn't think about. I know that when I started, I didn't think about all the sides of reviewing because I personally thought, hey, well, it's my opinion, blah, blah, blah. But there's someone else on the other end of that book.
Yeah.
Well, there's a few people on the other end of that book.
Yeah.
You know what? And sorry for going on my soapbox, but I just see some writers talk about how shitty some shows and TV shows or movies are, and I tell Brennan sometimes, I'm like, we could be friends with those people. Like all of us know people that write for certain television shows or movies. I'm like, do you really want to burn some bridges just because you didn't like something?
Yeah,
like it's okay, but some people take it to the next level. They're like, this sucks. That blah blah blah. I don't know. The internet would be a lot better if that attitude didn't exist.
Yeah.
Now I'll get off my soapbox. I would love to know where people can follow you. Also, where's your Twitter handle come from?
Oh. My Twitter handle totally shows how naive I was 2 years ago, because I think I've just passed my second anniversary with Twitter. I was literally, I went to a book fair. I actually had a stall on a book fair in another part, well, a few miles away. And they said to me, and you're not even on Twitter, because I was very sort of anti-social media. Yep. And so I set up my Twitter account for me, and I typed in my name, and it was taken, and then I did a little variation and it was taken, and then it sort of suggested that you have a nickname. So I thought, right, well, I'm, constantly looking for the right word to fit in the story. So serial semantic, you know what I mean? But I mean, I can't change it now because, well, I can't really, because it's out there too much in the world. So many people know it, and it's linked to so many things. But I'm like, what the hell have I done by choosing that? But it's too late. So it just basically reflects my naivety with social media.
That's funny. I had the same thing. I had a different handle at one point, and I'm like, I really got to get rid of this before, my name ends up in a bio or something. So just in the nick of time. Otherwise, I'd have been stuck.
I know. It's just a thought of how many people I'd have to inform that it has changed. Yep. Because it's everywhere, and so I just can't. So I'm just running with it.
That's fantastic. So, listener, sorry, Brendan, go ahead, bud.
I said it's good. It's unique.
That's true.
Yeah.
Listeners, if you are interested in checking out a little bit more content from Brennan and myself and a few guest posters, guest articlists, I don't know, go to deadheadspace.com. Terrible. I know. Brennan's giving me a look like, what are you talking about? We have content such as for Pride Month, we had 2 lovely articles from Bree Morgan and Eric LaRocca, and we have a few more articles from guests. We would also say go to the store tab if you are interested in merchandise. We have t-shirts, mugs, and a few other lovely things with my goofy mug on it. So let's jump to final thoughts. Cattherine, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I hope people pick up Immortelle and enjoy it. Obviously, that's, paramount in my thoughts at the moment. There's a trailer, and all the links are on my Twitter if anybody wants to see a bit more. And I would just like to say thank you so much for giving up your Sunday mornings. You both work hard, and you don't have to do this, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure, because we get to learn a whole lot from. We would never know about this stuff. I'll speak for Brennan on this, but I mean, just an hour and a half of talking to you. I mean, we learned a lot of things we could take away from ourselves, and hope others can too. Brennan, what are your final thoughts, bud?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I've learned more about Wales from you and Tim Leben than I did in 12 years of public education. So I'm happy to give up my Sunday mornings for that. But we've wanted you on for a while, and Immortelle gave us a nice chance to make it happen. And I echo you. I hope that a lot of people will go out. By the time this airs, it's available. Go out, grab it, read it, love it.
Thank you.
My final thoughts are thank you for giving us an hour and a half of your time. That means a lot, and I've had a blast. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and love to do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
And Brennan, thank you for being my co-host per usual. Mornings, I guess, make me sound goofier than at night. Next episode is with Bracken McLeod, where we will discuss his latest novel, Closing Costs, followed by... that'll be this upcoming Monday, followed by an episode with Peter Straub to close out this month. So stay tuned for that. Look out for Off Limits Press's Immortelle by Cattherine McCarthy. Also has a lot of, as we talked about, a lot of upcoming short fiction. So thank you, Cattherine. Thank you, Brennan. And
thank you.
And listeners, thank you. You have many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.